Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the Boston Office 365 user group in May. Believe it or not, this is our 8th year anniversary. So thanks for everyone that's been with us over the years, and we're still going strong. So brief intro, my name is Dimitri. I'm a partner at Turn Digital. Along with me, we have Mike Dixon, who's a senior consultant at Wellington Street, and we have Bill Gunning, who's the technical lead at the Executive Office of Technology and Services and Security for the state of Massachusetts. So the last session, we had a great presentation by Sean around troubleshooting performance issues in SharePoint Online sites. If you weren't able to join us last time, please check out our YouTube channel. I'm not sure if it's been posted yet, but if it hasn't been, it'll be within the near future. So moving forward, let's talk about some Office 365 updates since last time. So Microsoft's rolling out a new feature for Teams where you can set the together mode to appear for everybody. So in today's world, if you wanted to do together mode, you could do that for yourself. In the future world, you'll be able to make sure everyone in the meeting is able to have that same experience. And this is going to be rolling out this summer. Next feature, there's a new governance policy that's available, and this has been rolled out to all environments if you choose to enable it. But essentially, this gives you the ability to tell all of the groups that no longer have owners to have a request sent to them asking them who wants to become the new group owner. So this is great for scenarios where people might leave an organization or scenarios where the owners are removed for one reason or another, and they become ownerless groups, which of course translates to ownerless teams or SharePoint sites, depending on how those groups are associated. So this is a pretty neat feature, and I'm looking forward to testing this out. Next update is for all of our users that have Macs within their environment. So Microsoft has made Apple has made a pretty significant change with the latest version of macOS, and we've actually experienced this with one of our clients last week. And Python is no longer included or installed by default, which essentially means the onboarding scripts that were previously there for Intune would no longer work. We actually had the same thing occur with the Jamf script that we had for another client. So the solution for Microsoft is to go into the onboarding portal and download the new script that is now compatible with the latest version of macOS. Next update, so Microsoft is updating their secure score. So they're changing some of their parameters for how they're evaluating your security posture. They're going to be updating some of the recommendations. They're going to be fixing some of the other issues that were there for a period of time. So this is going to start rolling out right about now and finish by the end of the month. So if you see your secure score fluctuate, either up or down, it's probably nothing that you've done. It's probably just new measures of how things are being calculated and new recommendations available. So definitely keep an eye on this throughout this month. Next update is in Power BI. So Microsoft is adding a new feature to make it easier to navigate to the Power BI dashboards and reports that you're most frequently using. So they're adding in this new default panel here that's going to show you the recent ones that you've accessed, the ability to just favorite them, as well as see which ones have been shared with you. They're not taking away any of the old navigation or any of the old ways to get to things, but this should hopefully be a nice welcome addition, especially for users that might come in here every once in a while. There's a new set of analytics that is becoming available for the Power Platform at the tenant level. And this will give us a better sense of who are your top makers for the applications, what kind of activities are they doing, such as creating, modifying, deleting flows across your environments. It's also going to give you a much nicer inventory of what lives in your tenant. If you've ever had to go and take over a flow or a Power App from a user that's no longer with the organization, I'm sure you can share with me how unpleasant of an experience that was and didn't always work 100% the way that you would expect it to. So this will be a welcome change, and this should be coming out in the very near future. So that being said, huge thanks to our platinum sponsor, Turn Digital, which is a company that I work for. They're able to help keep the lights on, pay all of the administrative and legal fees, accounting fees, and so forth that we need to keep this group moving forward. Back when we're in person, they'll continue picking up the pizza tab as well. So that being said, let's move into our main event for tonight. So tonight we have 3 lightning sessions for you. Lightning sessions meaning they're going to be each about 15 to 20 minutes long. And within here, we're going to start with the M365 2022 roadmap presented by myself. So we'll take a peek in terms of what's coming for the rest of this year and things that you can look forward to. We're going to have Mike Dixon walk us through the newly released associated hub sites and how that could impact your overall SharePoint architecture. And then we're going to have Mr. Gunning walk us through how we can leverage PowerShell and Excel to query other data sources and pull content together and work with it right on your desktop. So with that being said, let me reshare my screen with my presentation about the roadmap. So let's talk about the rest of the roadmap for the rest of this year. So just some context before we kick this off. Everything that we're about to talk about is publicly available through the public Microsoft 365 roadmap. And with this, we focus on things that are still in development that have a target release date for general availability for this year. So we're not talking about things that are currently rolling out or any of the updates that we've been talking about in the beginning of our sessions or things you would have seen in the message center. This is really stuff that Microsoft is still not ready to release, but are planning to do so this year. So there's been, if you actually export all of the items in the roadmap, there's over 450 items that are still being planned for this year. We went ahead and looked at what the most relevant, what the most interesting features were that we believe will benefit our user group here. So we've boiled that down from 450 down to 70, and those 70 cover the different categories that you see on the slide here. So with that being said, why don't we dive in? So the first thing which we think is a pretty significant feature is that Microsoft is going to allow us to have M365 groups be part of other M365 groups. So now you can nest M365 groups when this becomes available, just like you're able to nest security groups. And I know for a lot of our clients, it's always been a hassle when, explaining how M365 groups function and that they don't allow nesting and you can't have hierarchies of, users and contractors and departments. Everything had to be very flat. So with this, of course, there's going to be a lot of interface changes, a lot of UI and API changes to facilitate this. But we're looking forward to this, and Microsoft is currently targeting this to become available at the end of this year. Moving forward, let's talk about the self-service password reset. So right now, if you go to any self-service password reset screen, there's Microsoft branding all over the place, including help from Microsoft resources and their logos. And Microsoft found that people find it confusing because if they're going to, Acme's tenant to go and reset their password and they see something about Microsoft and not Acme, they might question if they're in the right place. So Microsoft's going to introduce the abilities to completely customize it and remove all references to Microsoft. That's coming out this fall. Along the same lines, when we're looking at the branding for the login experiences, today you're allowed to set your background image, you can add your company logo, but Microsoft's going to take it a step further and give you the ability to fully customize this with predefined templates as well as with additional CSS customization that you can add to the page. So this will help companies that really want to, make sure they have a fully tailored experience, especially for their external users that might be coming into the environment. CloudKnox permission management. So this is a new feature within the Azure AD stack where Microsoft can start looking at all of the identities that are available within not just Microsoft stack, but also AWS and GCP, and look to see what permissions are granted that are not being used. So if you're set as a SharePoint admin and you never go into SharePoint, they might recommend pulling that back. Or if you are a user admin and you haven't logged in and performed any user management activities in a period of time, then perhaps you don't really need that role. And this is a great example of where privileged identity management would really come into place, where you would only escalate your permissions in the times that you need to. So CloudKnox is a very cool feature that's coming out this summer. And I certainly look forward to deploying this workload for our clients. Next is a concept called verifiable credentials. So this is a pretty interesting concept. So many of you are aware of how claims authentication works and how you can log into Facebook using your Gmail account and so forth. So this is basing the foundation on similar principles. And this is actually an open standard, similar to how OAuth is an open standard that's defined by W3C. And it's going to be implemented in the future across a wide variety of platforms. Microsoft is taking the lead on helping develop the Azure AD portion of being able to integrate this. But if we take a step back and we think about a basic scenario, like, we want to go buy a beer at a bar, the bartender takes a look at our ID and makes sure that we are of age, and then we continue on. Now, the bartender doesn't quite understand, is my license, if I'm from another country, actually real, and that's what they look like in that country? The bartender doesn't really have a source of authority to go and pull up a number into a database to see if it matches. And furthermore, some bars that they scan your IDs, they also save a picture of that so they can later prove that they scanned it. The challenge with that is that it's not a very secure nor robust system. There's a lot of inherent trust that's required in order for the system to work, which really opens it up to being exploited and abused. So verifiable credentials essentially means that if I go to the RMV and I have a valid license with my date of birth, when I go to a bar, instead of presenting a physical piece of paper, I can present my signed certificate from the RMV stating that this is information about me is true. And then at that point, they no longer need to actually look at my license that has other information that's not relevant to them. They also don't need to save a copy of this information anywhere on their systems because they have that checkbox that I am who I say I am with the proper, credential of my age, and life moves on. So as we look at more and more companies not wanting to hold on to PII and not be, subject to GDPR and other challenges, this really gives a new secure way to verify credentials of individuals without necessarily having to ask for a username, password, or other information. Really cool topic. If you're interested, there's a ton of very interesting blog posts and YouTube videos that explain this far better than I could in these last 30 seconds. So moving forward, message recall and exchange online. So for anyone that's ever tried to recall a message and skipped a heartbeat or two when they didn't come back, certainly knows what I'm talking about. So the recall feature in Exchange Online isn't that great. It works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes. And there's a lot of challenges around it because it's up to the email client to actually take care of that processing power. And in some cases, if you're using, let's say, the default Apple mail client instead of Outlook on your iPhone, it might not process it correctly. Or in other scenarios, Outlook just decides not to follow the rules. So Microsoft is taking this a step further and is actually going to be moving this from a client-side feature to a server-side feature, so that when you do a recall, provided the messages have not yet been opened, it's going to yank it right on the server end and give you much better control for when it was able to successfully pull that email back versus when it failed. So you'll get a nice consolidated report showing you from all the users that you sent it to, which ones succeeded and which ones did not succeed. So this is definitely going to be a welcome feature, and that's coming out later this year. So next thing is around custom branding for the quarantine notifications. So one challenge with the quarantine notifications that come from Microsoft is that the emails themselves look like they could be phishing attempts. And that's because they come branded without necessarily your company logo. They come from an address that's not related to your organization. And it's a little difficult to train users to say, okay, this is not a phishing email, although it looks like it could be one, but this other one is. So Microsoft's going to give you that branding to give you that one more layer of comfort and being able to actually have this come from your own domain as opposed to from another domain. That's coming out this summer. So another feature coming to Insider Risk Management. So this is the O365 E5 feature, which is where it's going to use AI and machine learning to identify data leaks by disgruntled users. So Microsoft's going to be taking a lot of different signals from your typical user's behavior and how that might be modified. So if we see somebody that rarely downloads files, all of a sudden starting to go to 10 different sites, downloading files, sending forwards to email addresses that they haven't communicated to with before, and a variety of other things, which Microsoft's not going to explain their algorithms in detail, but this is going to trigger some alarms and potentially be tied into a response runbook that can maybe disable their account, add further encryption to outgoing emails, and things of that nature. But this is going to be a pretty interesting feature to see how that works in the real world. That's coming out later this year. Next feature is around data lifecycle management. So this is really talking about retention labels and the overall, declaring as records or eventually disposing of documents once their end of life reaches. Today, it's been very much of a closed system inside of the compliance center. There were some APIs available, but it was still not clean, and you still couldn't get to all of the data that you needed for a typical workflow. So Microsoft is now exposing additional endpoints, and they're adding Power Automate actions so that you can now start to take actions once an item reaches the end of its retention period. So I think this is going to be a very welcome addition to any company using retention labels. Moving forward, so there's going to be a new feature coming that's going to allow the labels to remain unlocked for manual declaration. So, like, for example, sometimes some of the file needs to live on for, say, 30 years after the file has been created. But we're not done with drafting the final policy that will then need to take that effect. So with this scenario, we'll be able to declare the file as a record after we're done collaborating with it by having that label applied to it from the very beginning. So in doing so, it could do things like prevent accidental deletion and take care of some of those other retention features, while at the same time allowing iterations to continue. Similarly, we also have the ability to apply a retention action at the end of a retention period. So today, when you create a retention label, you have to very clearly define what happens at the end of that lifecycle. Is the file deleted? Is it sent for an additional disposition review, etc.? Now you'll actually be able to go and apply additional labels. So maybe if we have, a 10-year label on a document, and then once that's done, maybe we apply another label that says, it can be deleted, but it won't be necessarily automatically deleted for another 5 years. So you have a lot more flexibility with how you structure your retention schedules within the platform. The next feature is around the same thing with auto labeling of cloud attachments. So again, going back into retention labels, let's say I send out an email with a link to a Word document to a few prospects. And I want to make sure that they could read the message, but I also want that link to be automatically killed off after, say, 60 days. By assigning a retention label to the document, we can ensure the document is then removed after that period of time. Touching back on the topic of graph APIs, so as part of that Power Automate actions that Microsoft has created, they've also begun exposing additional graph APIs to be able to go in and manage the labels and the events. Previously, you could only do it through PowerShell if you wanted to script it. Now we're going to have a little bit more flexibility, which should open the door to additional, third-party customizations to go and manage the life cycle of your labels. So this will be coming out late summer this year. The next feature we want to talk about is the audit logs. These are the unified audit logs inside of the Compliance Center. And Microsoft is reworking a bit of how these work. And of course, standard is what you receive out of the box. The premium is if you pay for up to 10 years of the log storage. And essentially, this service is going to become a lot faster. It's going to allow you to schedule searches and then come back and download the results. If anyone's ever gone and tried to run an audit report today, you click the run button and you might be sitting there for 5-10 minutes until you get some results back. And then sometimes you're not sure if it's all the results or if it's still loading. It's not a very user-intuitive interface. So we're going to be welcoming this change as well later this year. Next is the Microsoft Defender for Identity, auditing capabilities. So one of the gaps in Microsoft's administrative platforms in general today is that there isn't a lot of great granular logging of what changes an administrator makes to your tenant configuration. So if somebody goes and, let's say, changes your SharePoint external sharing from anonymous to a more restricted option, or if somebody goes and decides to disable the conditional access policy for your MFA enforcement. Those events are not consistently logged, and a lot of those events are just not loggable events today. So with this feature, Microsoft is actually starting to log more and more of those administrative changes that are happening on the Azure AD side. So next, Microsoft is also starting to expand the options that you would receive in the anti-malware policy with your Exchange Microsoft Defender configuration. So there's going to be more file types that Microsoft will be able to dig into, and it'll give you more control over how those content types are managed. So today, Microsoft covers all of your standard content types, your zip files, your PDFs, Office documents, but there could be malware hidden in other files, files that aren't being covered yet today. So this is going to expand into that area. The next is in terms of the information protection. So we're talking about sensitivity labels now. So today you can assign a sensitivity label to, let's say, a Word file. And then when you go to save the Word file as a PDF, that PDF does not have the same sensitivity applied to it. It's just a standalone PDF, and depending on where you put it, you might have auto tagging rules, or you might use the AIP scanner tool to go and enforce it yourself, but there's no connection to what was there previously. With this new feature, when you go and you convert one of your files over into a PDF file, it's going to go ahead and keep that sensitivity label that was there on the parent file. And the next feature, so SITs, which stands for Sensitive Information Types. So as many of you are aware today, you can set up auto labeling rules to go and find social security numbers, license numbers, bank statements, etc. So Microsoft is expanding that category of information types to include sensitive information. So this could be like passwords or access tokens, things that you probably want to be able to tag and protect accordingly. So this is coming out this summer. So the next is to apply default label policies to existing documents being edited. So today, if you are creating a new file within a document library, there's not a great way to tell Microsoft, look, anything that we put into this library, go ahead and assign the sensitivity label to it. However, this feature is coming. So once this is in place, you will be able to create a document within that library, and it will go ahead and automatically apply that sensitivity label. So pretty cool stuff. I know a lot of our clients were looking for this, especially if they have a site that's been designated as being a sensitive site or a deal site or something where everything within that site should be tagged as confidential or highly sensitive. But under today's rules, there's really not a great way to do that, because Microsoft's approach so far has been really to look at the contents of a file and match that back to an information type and then use that to make a decision. That way, if you put your tax returns on any SharePoint site that's configured in the tenant to encrypt the file, it'll do that even if you don't put that into a site called My Taxes. But with this approach, it's a little bit different and covers a different use case that I think is pretty common. Another feature that's coming out is the ability to actually have colors for sensitivity labels. Today's sensitivity labels are all just black and white, and they look like any other menu drop-down item that you would have in your applications. But Microsoft is deciding to really give you more control over the look and feel of these labels and how they appear in these applications. So coming in September, we're going to have the ability to define what those colors should look like on the server side. And then come later in the month or the following month, we'll be able to actually get that new experience with the colors to be rendered in Word, PowerPoint, Excel. And in the future, it'll be in Power BI and in other platforms as well. So here's another default label. So previously we talked about the default labels for files that are being edited. This will also let you do the same thing for files once they're being uploaded for the first time. So it's not just new files that you create within the interface. It could also be from uploads, which by extension should also apply to migrations if you're uploading using a tool such as ShareGate. The next enhancement is around sticking on the information protection category, is that PDF files that are encrypted can now be searched in eDiscovered. Previously, and today actually, if something is encrypted, The search indexer can't break the encryption to get into the file. The eDiscovery also can't because it relies on the search index as this primary starting point. Those files, you can only search for the file name or other metadata associated to it. Microsoft is now expanding to put the search indexer to have the ability to go and read those files and make sure that they're indexed properly. Files at rest. So similar to what we've discussed before, this will now allow you to go and apply this for files that the default labels for files that have already been uploaded previously into the libraries if they are PDF files. So just to take a step back, when we look at the sensitivity labels today, there's only a handful of formats or so that actually support sensitivity labels. So specifically, it's all of the Office formats plus PDFs. Microsoft at Ignite last year announced plans to support pretty much any content types going forward. And they'll accomplish that by essentially putting that into a container, putting a label on that container, and then streamline the user interface so you don't know what's inside of a container. Because when you think about it, like if you just take, let's say, a text file, there's no room in the text file, file schema to actually have encryption or have sensitivity labels or any of that good stuff. But you might still have text files that contain sensitive information because they were sent to you from a client under a confidentiality agreement. So what this is just saying is that now we're going to take the same feature that we have within Word, PowerPoint, Excel of auto-labeling them within SharePoint and now expand that to PDF files as well. DLP for complex situations. So if you've ever had to configure the DLP rules today, you'll realize that you can use regular expressions and you could use certain keywords for search criteria, but you weren't really able to build a hierarchy of if these three conditions are met but not this condition, then go ahead and do this. You'd have to get creative with creating multiple policies and making sure that they're not overlapping with each other. With this new enhancement, we'll have more syntax operators such as and, or, and not to build some more of these complex rules. Moving forward, so Microsoft is introducing custom result types for Microsoft Search. So if you've ever worked with SharePoint 2013 or previously on-prem, you'd have a concept of a content type, not a content type, a result type that would appear in your enterprise search, where if something is, let's say, a Word file, maybe you get that preview so that you can tap through it right there and scroll through it. If it was, an image, maybe you give it like a little carousel with a light box that you can scroll through that separately. But every different content type essentially could have a different way that it was being reflected in those search results. If it was a person, it would be their profile picture on the left side, etc. So Microsoft's bringing that same type of functionality into modern search, where you'll be able to prepare different display templates using adaptive cards, so that for different content types that are coming in, you'll be able to display them in different ways. I know this is going to be a very well-desired feature that's coming out later this summer. Expanding on search, where Microsoft continues to invest heavily into, D365 will now appear within your Microsoft search results, which is outstanding for companies that use this, and it helps break down the silos between these different applications. Microsoft is also expanding the Microsoft Search to not just pull back like files that you have in O365, but also go through and pull relevant teams and conversations from Outlook so that you have one search experience and being able to see across the entire gamut of what the content that you have access to. And of course, being able to refine to drill into specific areas. But this way, we don't have to go to Teams to do a Team search. We don't have to go to Office to do a SharePoint search, and then Outlook to do an Outlook search. We'll have this all in one convenient location. A pretty cool feature that's coming to Teams is for when you're going back and you're watching a recording of a meeting. Microsoft's going to add little markers to show you when you personally joined a meeting or left a meeting that was being recorded. That way you can quickly see what you missed and catch up on just that portion of it. Or if you had a very lively conversation, you could also zoom in on when you were present for that meeting to be able to replay it that way. So if you weren't part of that meeting, you won't see any markers. So pretty neat feature. Another feature that's coming is that if you have defined Exchange contacts, meaning on the server end, you've created contacts using Exchange Online, which you may often do for external users that you want to appear within your gal. So let's say you have an external IT support provider. You might add them as a contact in your Exchange Online so that when somebody goes to send an email, they can click the to button and say, oh, IT support, even though it actually has an email address that could be completely external to your org. So Microsoft is taking this whole concept and saying that if someone's trying to dial a phone number from Teams and that contact in Exchange Online has a phone number associated to it, we'll make it connect the dots and we'll allow that call to be easily found from Teams. Microsoft is also expanding the reactions when you want to show an emoji on top of a Teams chat message. Today there's about 5 of them. There's a happy face, a laughing face, an upset face, a shocked face, and a thumbs up. Going forward, you're gonna have over 800 emojis to pick from. I see a few claps in the audience here. Uh, I could say there's at least probably 5 more that would have been useful. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with another 800. But it'll be cool to see how this evolves in the workplace. All right, if you have a Teams room, meaning a Teams conference room with a Teams room device, um, today things were a little flaky if that room was invited to a Zoom meeting or a WebEx meeting. Some of the providers like Crestron actually had an abstraction layer to handle those scenarios. In other cases, you would need to expand a meeting and then click a link, and it was a whole process to join a call. Microsoft's essentially giving you first party support so that you can click the join button just like you could in Teams, and it'll go out and it'll join the Zoom or WebEx meetings out of your meeting room. So nice to see Microsoft playing nice. And of course, this day and age, I feel like just about every client has their own different technology that they use between these and others as well. There's another pretty cool feature coming to Teams conference rooms. So if you have a panel that's outside of your conference room that shows the upcoming meetings, who has the room blocked, and so forth, you might be in a scenario where you finished an hour-long meeting in 20 minutes, and the room today would remain checked out to you for the remainder of your meeting time, unless you cancel the meeting or if you reschedule the meeting to have a lesser time, which nobody ever does. So they're adding a new feature to the panel where you can basically say, I'm done. And in doing so, it'll automatically make the room available. So if anybody else wants to reserve it, they'd be able to. A pretty neat feature. So another great update on the Teams Admin Center is that Microsoft is improving the overall dashboards that they have, where you can see call qualities, you can see device health, and so forth. Today, a lot of those metrics you could only see within that Teams admin interface, and there wasn't a convenient way to export all of those data points into Excel files or to share them through alerts. There were some capabilities, but not the entire breadth and depth of what you have in the Admin Center. So Microsoft is expanding your ability to integrate and export content out of the Admin Center. So I think this will also pave the way for additional ways to get smarter and proactively reach out to users that are having problems with their meetings or calls and help troubleshoot what's causing it. Another pretty cool feature is the language interpretation. So many of you might have seen the Microsoft commercial that they played on TV about a year ago, where you have people from all different parts of the world talking in a Teams meeting. They're all speaking their own native languages, but the recipients are hearing it in their language of choice. So somebody could be speaking in Japanese into their Teams meeting, and then somebody in England might be listening to it in English in real time. So Microsoft is bringing this feature forward this summer, and from what I've heard, it actually works extremely well. So I'll be super happy to get my hands on this and see if we can test with some of our clients that have offices around the world. Another interesting feature that's coming is it's a feature called Speaker Coach. So this is going to provide users with the private, just one-on-one, not shared with your organization or administration, but really just personalized feedback on the speaking and presentation skills in a post-meeting summary. So this will be automatically generated. It's not an individual that's going to be there and critiquing the way you're presenting. I don't have any examples for what kind of information or what kind of feedback they would be providing, but this is coming out in just a few months. So it'll be super cool to see how this works. Next feature, every once in a while, you'll have people that are joining Teams meetings from the browser. They might not have the Teams client installed, or maybe they're trying to log in to multiple tenants at a given time. And the experience within the browsers has always been a little bit behind what was in the desktop applications. So Microsoft is improving these features, including the pre-join experience, the dynamic views, the control bars, and starting to bring that a little bit more advanced functionality into the browser. Next is to join a meeting by a code. So if you've used Zoom, you've seen that you can enter a 6-digit code to be able to log into a meeting. Microsoft is bringing that functionality. Within Viva Topics, pretty soon you'll be able to create segments of topics based on sites and information architecture. So that way, if you have multiple different initiatives or departments or business units that you really want to have separate knowledge centers, you'll be able to do so. There's going to be support for types of topics. So you might have a topic that's the name of a project or a product or a name of a department or team within your organization. You'll now have basically a second level of hierarchy to what these topics belong to within Microsoft Viva. Microsoft's also going to be adding additional analytics to see how your users are interacting with the different topics, how many views they have, how many edits, and just more insight to help drive and curate that. Fresh run experiences. So for those that are using Viva Topics for the first time, Microsoft's going to add a little overlay and explain how things work. I think this will be really helpful for new users, especially because you see a lot of things, but you don't quite understand how, all the technology and how those pages were generated, essentially. Next thing is that if you use bookmarks in Microsoft Search today, meaning, if somebody searches for holiday or holiday calendar, you can have that first result appear in a special box that takes you to your authoritative page in your intranet that says this is the company holidays for this year. But if you have that in place and there's a Viva topic that matches it, the Viva topic today will take precedence and you won't get that bookmarked first result appearing. With this change, you'll be able to see both next to each other. Next is in terms of timeouts. So if you're within SharePoint Admin Center or if you're within Exchange Admin Center, you could specify how long a user has to be idle before you log them out and force them to re-authenticate. Microsoft is moving this to be a centralized tenant-level feature, which will then be expanded into other applications as well. New feature coming that I think is going to be very welcome, especially to ad hoc videos. There's going to be a new button on the Office start page where you can start recording. And this could be your webcam, this could be your screen share. And you no longer need to set up a Teams meeting to do this. You can just click start recording, record it. It's going to be put into your OneDrive, then you can share it out. I know we have a number of clients that encourage executives to record 30 to 60-second videos at least once a week for what they're working on, who they're working with, people that they're engaged with, just be able to share that as part of their intranet. And it's always been a huge pain to tell an executive to go record a video on their phone, upload it to OneDrive, click a share link. It was just a very disjointed process. Whereas here, you just start recording, it's already in the OneDrive, your executive admin has access to it and they'll be able to put it in the right location. Sync reports. Microsoft is rolling out the new OneDrive sync dashboards. It's currently in preview mode, but it gives you the ability to basically say which of your users have issues. We've all had scenarios where, a user comes in and says, I lost my laptop, you build them a new laptop, you restore them in known folders, and they're missing a lot of files because their last actual sync was months prior. So this dashboard will give us better insight into the health of how that's functioning. Microsoft is also moving the Outlook signatures into the cloud to make it consistent across all of your devices. So you will no longer need to reestablish your signature on every device that you have. This will be out later this year. And with iOS, you'll also now have the ability to have a rich HTML signature for your emails. The only caveat is you can't create it inside the Outlook app. You have to do it elsewhere and then paste it into that signature box on your iOS Outlook app. hopefully this will also be released for Android soon. Loop components in Mail. So Microsoft Loop, which was announced at Ignite last year, is part of the Fluid framework, and Microsoft is starting to allow that to be supported for real-time collaborations inside of emails. It's going to be released this summer. It'll be interesting to see how this looks and feels once we get our hands on it. Another really cool feature, especially with hybrid work, is this new option that Microsoft is releasing into Outlook, where you can start to define what your working hours are and where you're working from. So you'll be able to specify if you are working from home, if you're going to be in the office, and if so, in which location, and as well as what hours you're working. Because as all of us know, with COVID and schooling and everything else, people have adjusted their schedules to accommodate children or other commitments that they have day in and day out. This will be a nice and easy way to be able to go and share with your colleagues where you're going to be to make in-person time more effective. Just looking at time, I realized that this lightning talk went a little bit over. I have about 6 slides left, so I'll go quickly. Today in Outlook, if you put in a link to a SharePoint document or a OneDrive, it's going to remap it to the file name. This is coming to Mac Outlook for the Mac as well. There's going to be the ability to support retention policies for Outlook for Mac. To be honest, I was actually surprised to hear that this was not already a feature, but this is coming out this month, or next month rather. New feature coming to Planner to have recurring tasks. So this will be interesting to see how this works, whether it's going to be like a series type of task or if it's going to be just individual tasks repeating. So looking forward to this one. We're going to be able to add rich text and images into Planner notes. There's going to be new conditional access policies that are going to be available where you can lock down specific URLs in SharePoint for additional security. So you'll be able to say if someone's accessing like the secure site, maybe they need to re-MFA every time. Whereas if they're accessing your intranet, maybe their current session is good enough. Previously, you could do this by application. Now you'll be able to do it specifically by site. There's a new experience to be able to add SharePoint pages and news as tabs in Teams without leaving the Teams app. Better integration with SharePoint there. Microsoft is going to be releasing a new PowerShell-based tool to help migrate your SharePoint Designer workflows into Power Automate flows. They're going to start with PowerShell-based commands to do so, and then later they'll move it into their out-of-the-box SharePoint migration tool. I'm very curious to see how they're going to do this because we have attempted to build something similar, and there is just simply not a one-for-one replacement for many actions that you could do in SharePoint Designer compared to Flow. So very curious how this comes out. There's going to be new options coming to SharePoint for being able to search faster with specified scopes. There's a new concept of private drafts where you can create a private draft that other owners of the site will not be able to see unless you decide to share it with them. New feature coming to SharePoint navigation to be able to open things in a new tab. A new feature coming to eDiscovery. So today, if you put a SharePoint site under litigation hold, it's going to cover all of the site contents, including what's in the recycle bin, because the recycle bin content would actually be in the preservation hold library. But there could be a scenario where a site is not on hold, you run an eDiscovery search against the site, and in that scenario, whatever is in the recycle bin will not be returned as part of that eDiscovery result. So this change is going to allow that to also cover the recycle bin. Microsoft's also going to start publishing their API rate limits and app quotas for SharePoint and OneDrive. Today, if you're doing too much, Microsoft will just tell you in the headers to slow down. But going forward, Microsoft's going to publish official guidance, which is going to be the first time I believe they're doing this since Office 365 was launched. So a very welcome change there. There's some new features coming to Visio for the web around mind maps that's coming out this summer. And it's basically going to be an easy way to collect the thoughts of brainstorms and brainstorming sessions and capture, disconnected ideas that are connected in one way or another. New charts and some additional org chart features coming to Visio for the web. Better UX and faster load times, more responsiveness for Visio for the web as well. Big feature coming to Windows 365. You're going to be able to Azure AD join your Windows 365 devices. Today, you have two options. You can go the business route or the enterprise route. The enterprise route requires you to set up point-to-point or site-to-site VPNs and essentially hybrid join those devices so that you can manage them from Intune. If you go the business way, they're basically standalone VMs that you don't have a whole lot of management capabilities on top of. So with this, you'll be able to have the enterprise flavor of managing the Win365 environments without having to go through the whole hassle of setting up a hybrid join for these. You'll be able to freeze a Windows 365 PC and essentially put the whole thing under legal hold. You'll be able to apply conditional access to applications that are running within Win365 and Azure Virtual Desktops. So for example, if someone opens up your NetSuite app, you could send a secondary MFA prompt to their mobile phones to ensure that they are the ones that are trying to launch a sensitive application. There's going to be support for Linux and Android subsystems on Win365. And that brings us to the end of this double lightning round, essentially. So if you have any questions about what you've heard, I'm going to stick around after our session ends here today, but feel free to reach out to me on my standard socials and email. And with that being said, I'm not going to take any questions here because this is all things that are not yet been released, and there's a lot of these that only have 1 or 2 sentences, so I don't know a whole lot I can tell you without breaking NDAs. So with that being said, I'm just going to pass the mic over to our second speaker to talk to us about SharePoint Hub associations. So Mike, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dimitri. That was more of the lightning storm of applications there. That was pretty incredible. Lots of great information in there. Good stuff that I'm really looking forward to seeing. You guys can just give me a quick thumbs up if you can see my screen.
All good.
Awesome. Thank you. Come on. All right. So this is me. My name is Mike Dixon. I've been working in IT for well over 20 years now, and have done a ton of work across the Microsoft environment. And I work for Wellington Street Consulting, which are Office 365 consultants that specialize in something is auto-forwarding my slides, specialize in digital culture, process automation, and cloud education. So for today's agenda, we're going to go over real quick the what I'm dubbing the Classic Hub overview. And I just want to say right up front, when I say Classic Hub, that's not Microsoft official terminology. I'm just using it throughout this presentation to distinguish the difference between some of the different things that we're talking about. So by Classic Hubs, we just mean the hubs that we all know and love as of today. And I have a poll for you guys. I forgot to, I meant to pop this up as soon as I started. If you guys can just give us a quick idea of how much you've used hubs, so I get an idea of who I'm speaking to and where I should focus my energy today. And also, this is very much going to be kind of a Q&A sort of a thing. So if you guys have any questions that you'd like me to address, please just use the raise hand feature that's right under the reactions button, which is across the top of your Teams toolbar. So anyways, back to this. We're going to do a Classic Hub overview. Then we're going to discuss what's new, some of the, not drawbacks, but limitations to the new stuff. It's important to understand what that is, and also that it's very new. So things are changing rapidly. So again, by Classic Hubs, all we mean is where we were prior to these announced changes. These changes were originally announced back in November and are just now starting to kind of roll out. They've been in first release for a little while, and I think they're starting to hit the regular sites. So let's start with a little bit of a clarification here. Throughout Microsoft documentation, you will find the word hub used kind of interchangeably amongst these two different things. Frequently, it's used as the central site that other sites can be connected to. Or other times it'll be used collectively to refer to not only that central site, but also all of the sites that are connected to it. All right. So why should you hub? Let's see here. I just go back and look real quick. I just want to take a look at the results here and what you guys have said. Okay, so the majority of people have only used it a little bit. That's interesting. Okay, so I would highly encourage you guys to use hubs. Hubs are actually wonderful and super useful for all of the reasons that I have listed here. I actually kind of listed these in order. Well, not quite, but the top two are definitely my favorite reasons. So when you add a hub site, you automatically get an additional navigation bar. So this navigation bar is in the style of a top link bar that goes across the very top of the screen. And that navigation bar is inherited by all sites that are then joined to that hub from that point forward. And also gives you one place to edit for all of those navigations. This is one of my absolute favorite features of hub sites. It really cleaned up the navigation experience in SharePoint, in my mind, if this is used properly. And there's definitely a whole bunch of strategies as to how to use the navigation bars. I could do a whole topic on that. But I would say in general, the simplest rule of thumb, two quick and easy rules. A, always set up your intranet to be a hub site. And then B, put links to your other hub sites, your other root hubs on that navigation somewhere. And then that gives you pretty much just a few clicks to get to anywhere. Or at the very least, on every other hub, designate one of your hubs to be kind of the central hub and have everybody else be able to link back to that. And that's one of the best ways to kind of design your navigation, so you can kind of always get from anywhere to anywhere else within the least amount of clicks and without having to use the search functionality. All right. One of the other fantastic features is the scoping for the web parts. So a lot of the web parts have the ability to display content automatically from the entire hub. So instead of just displaying content from this particular site or a list of specific sites, you can there will be an option for display all content from this hub, and it will aggregate across all of the children of that particular hub. If you use this setting in combination with some of the other filters, there's so many different options. It really opens up a whole new world for what you can do with hubs, or what you can do with how you aggregate your information from site to site. The other great thing about that is completely dynamic, and as you add and remove children to that hub, it automatically updates what's being displayed in that same fashion. Okay. One of the other benefits is inherited themes. So the theme of your hub site will actually be inherited by any children's sites that you join to that. If you do not want that to be the case, that is actually a reversible thing and is not heavily enforced. So it will happen automatically when you join a child to the hub, but if you then manually change the theme back to what it was before or something different, that will stick. Hub registration can be triggered for can be used as a trigger for automations. So if you use one of the techniques for using hubs is to represent different stages of a process. So you maybe have a site that gets joined to a different hub based on the stage of the process that that site represents. And you can have site designs, which are now, I believe, called site templates, kicked off that will automatically do whatever you had in that in the various site scripts that are attached to that. So you can have, for example, when it goes from one list to another, you can have it automatically add, or when it goes from one hub to another, you can have it on. So yeah, so hub registration can be a trigger point, and there's some really creative and fun things that can happen with that. View access can be inherited. This is one of the more recent features that was added to it. So you can set it up so that you can assign like a specific group or audience to be able to have view access to all members of a hub. And then search scope. So when you do searching from within any member of the site, or at least when you do searching from the parent, it will include results from all of the children, all of the members of that hub. Anybody have any questions about any of that? I know that's kind of a lot. I'm hoping that this is mostly a review for most people.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Just a quick question. That view access, does that trump, does the hub, if you set the view access, does the hub access trump the individual subsite access? Like if you set different permissions?
I believe it is additional to.
Okay.
Honestly, that's not a feature that I have ever taken advantage of, so I'm not 100% sure. But I believe it's additional to. If somebody else out there knows the answer to that for certain, please mention it in the chat. I'm guessing Dimitri would know the answer to that.
Okay,
but,
thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. So, as if that wasn't enough for why you would want to use hubs, one of the other great things about it is just overall, it's just general better architecture. So hubs basically came about when Microsoft wanted to change their policies from, or their best practice recommendations, I should say, not policies, but their best practice recommendations of doing sub-sites to doing all of your sites at the root level. So the hubs were basically created to give some sort of a structure across the top and be able to group those sites together. One of the huge benefits of using hubs versus sub-sites is you can completely restructure it without there being any impact to the end user. Okay. And what I mean by that is if you have subsites, then you can't restructure those without there being impact. Restructuring subsites is a nightmare, and it's basically a migration project. But if you just want to restructure some hub sites, you can do that without ever having to move a single file. No URLs are ever changed, because the joining of a child to a hub does not impact the URL in any way, shape, or form. It also does not impact the permissions, with the exception of the aforementioned. There's an optional setting for enabling the inheritance of a viewer group. But other than that, there's no impact on permissions, and it's completely reversible. So the other great thing about this is, if you work for one of those companies where, management feels the need to restructure every 6 to 8 months, hubs are totally the way to go for you guys. You can enable that restructure without breaking all the links to everything, and everything's still good. So wonderful, wonderful architectural improvements with that. Any questions on any of that? All right. So let's talk about what's new. All right. So associate hubs are what's new. There's not a lot new as far as features are concerned. There's only these 3, and really it's kind of only 2. But this top one is really a game changer. So one of the most important things to understand is when you associate a hub to another hub, it is not the same as joining a regular site to a hub. It really is a different kind of relationship, and it's really important to kind of think of that as a completely different kind of relationship. So a lot of people refer to this as nesting of hubs. I don't think that's a good way of thinking of it. It's really closer to, I'm not sure if this analogy is going to work for everybody on this call, but it's more analogous to setting up like trust relationships between Active Directory domains. It only allows very specific types of access between them. So for example, well, I'll get into a bunch of the stuff that it doesn't allow. I have a slide on that. So what this does is it gives us the ability to actually create a hierarchy amongst the hubs. So you can take any one hub and say, I want this hub to be associated with this other hub. And you would do that as the parent. Okay, so the way that works is in the SharePoint admin portal, you would go into there and you would pull up the child hub, and in the child hub, there's a new property called parent, and you can associate another hub into that parent. So it's important to know that that's the way that that goes. And also that is essentially the only way to do that outside of PowerShell. This can also be done all via PowerShell. All of these configurations can be done. But because this has to be done through the SharePoint admin portal, this is exclusively limited to global admins and SharePoint admins for the tenant. Okay, if you are a site administrator, even if you're a site administrator on both of the hubs that you want to associate, there is no interface available at this time for creating that connection. Okay, that's one of the big distinctions. On the previous hubs, in our classic hubs, you can actually, when you make it a hub, the collection owner for that hub can actually designate people who are allowed to join other sites to that hub. So they can specify people with that access. One of the other nice things that has come along with this is dynamic navigation. So what we see now is within our navigations, and this is actually how I first realized that this was hitting my tenant, is instead of just having, when you go to edit the navigation, you have the option of setting up either a link or a label. You may start to see two new options in there, one for associated hubs and one for associated child hubs. If you select one of those options, it essentially acts as a label, but it will be a label that automatically creates sub-items, and the sub-items are related to whatever that object is. Okay, so it will automatically connect or populate that with children hubs or associated hubs. Quick little note about this, and the reason that there's a question mark after this. In the testing that I did in preparing for this, we found this behavior to be very, I'll say, inconsistent. And not as described in the documentation from Microsoft. So just be aware of that at this time. I'm sure this is something that they'll update in the very near future. But at this time, this is a little unreliable. But I look forward to them sorting that out. And I also hope that they add that, actually expand that capability, because that's really cool. The other thing that is new is the expanded search scoping. So this isn't exactly new because you got expanded search scoping with the previous ones, but just the fact that you can now have the multiple tiers is really, really nice. And there actually is some really good visibility to that within your the search experience. So if you're in a child hub, it will actually show you the breadcrumbs all the way up to the parent hub across the top of your results page now, which is very cool. Oh, and one other thing that I did not put on here, but it's kind of a limiting factor, is they have hard-coded this to be limited to only 3 levels of connection. So you can have a parent, a child, and then a grandchild, and that's it. Okay, so only 3 layers deep as far as associations are concerned. Now, again, I want to make that clear. That's from hub to hub. So that does not include all of the members of each of those hubs. That's an additional layer under each of those 3. Any questions on any of that?
All right. Do you have a question? Your hand's raised.
So many questions. So I have department hubs set up all over the place.
Yeah.
They are separate from my home hub, which is what I've got. The extraneous sites like my distro fund site, my patient advocacy site, they're all facilities. All of those got hubbed up to our solid space, or our main hub, our tenant hub, which of course now with global navigation helps. I get that navigation, so I get global navigation. If I were to hub my department hubs, my IT hub to my solid, my tenant hub, how does that impact my navigation? I mean, the solid one pulls up news anywhere. I can connect it to any site.
So again, by default, it doesn't affect your navigation unless you want it to.
Yeah.
Okay.
So play with it.
I'm actually glad you pointed that out, actually, because I mentioned this dynamic navigation. I should state this is optional.
Yeah.
Okay. So it does not automatically do the dynamic navigation. It just gives you the ability to add dynamic navigation.
A screenshot of what it's going to look like, the dynamic navigation would be really helpful, because if I start messing with it, I mean, I got a sandbox, but that's not hubbed
Yeah.
anywhere. I'd have to make a couple sandbox sites and try to hub them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so news, I mean, pulling up news, obviously when you hub something, now it expands the amount of news sites you can pull
No.
news from. No, doesn't
No.
do that.
No. So yeah, so I was just about to get to that. This is my, so on this slide, we're going to talk about limitations and what that does. Okay. Yeah, if you have any other questions, then we can hit me up after this slide. So I originally called this slide limitations, but I decided that that was a little too skeptical, because this really is a relatively new feature. This was just announced back in November. So I kind of consider it in its beta phase right now, even though they are releasing it. But the dynamic nav is a little not as expected, I'll say. So I retitled this My Hopes and Dreams. So things that I'm hoping to see come that are not there yet. I would love to see the web parts, and this is exactly what you were just asking me about, Deb. I would love to see like the web parts be updated so that they too can have the expanded scoping options. So right now in these web parts, you have the option of just like, show me content from this site, show me from this list of sites, and then you can manually select it, or you can select, show me this hub. I would love to see more on the show me all from this hub to maybe all from this hub's parent, or all children hubs of this, or all sibling hubs, you know, something like that. I think would be very helpful. I think it would also be helpful if Microsoft adopted some of the language that I just used to better illustrate the relationships there. I said siblings. That's not anything that I've ever seen referred to in any Microsoft stuff, but basically any two hubs that have the same parent. I would love to see, I love this idea of the dynamic navigation, and I would love to see that apply just to classic sites. You know, if there was a way, or classic hubs is what I mean by that. So if there was a way on the classic hubs to just say, hey, show me all of the members of this particular hub, that would be great. There is a way to do that with the site's web part, and it's actually one of my favorite things to do, is on the hub landing page, I'll put in the web part for the sites and just say all sites in this hub, and then that kind of gives you like this dynamic navigation. And the other really nice thing about that is it's also security trimmed. Yeah, so I would love to see that actually kind of trickle down a tier and see that over there. And then the last thing that I'd really like to see is some visualization tools. So everybody who's doing blog posts about this is kind of diagramming this out, and that's great. And I do recommend that you do that when you lay this out for your company. But as of right now, there is no visual representation of like a tree sort of diagram of how your sites are laid out. I would love to see that somewhere in the SharePoint Admin Center. All right. And that's pretty much it. I have some references here. These are the documents that I used to pull this together. We've got the official Microsoft documentation, and also the SharePoint Maven has done a wonderful blog post on this that actually is far more in depth than the Microsoft documentation. So thank you to the Maven for that. And also, we just did a bunch of testing of that here. So I'm going to open it up to some Q&As, but I'm going to leave this slide up. You guys can feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or want to follow up, and we can talk about that. Any questions? All right. All right.
Plus, we're stunned.
It is a lot to wrap your head around. That's definitely fair to say, that there's a lot to wrap your head around. But yeah, if you guys think of anything, we're also going to be doing a Q&A, kind of a mingle after this session and after we turn off the recording, and we can talk about any specific concerns anybody may have there. But until then, or before we get to that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Mr. Bill Gunning.
So yeah, I'm Bill Gunning. I work for the Commonwealth of Mass, and so I focus primarily on Power BI, SharePoint. We also have Atlassian and OnBase, so we work with other applications, enterprise level applications. And what I'm going to go over today with some API, I'm going to do a live demo of it. So I'm going to just show PowerShell, and then I'm going to call up the data into Excel, and I'm also going to do Power BI real quick and just show you some of just basically how to get started with APIs. I like to use PowerShell and Excel before I go to Power Automate. So I like to fully understand the API. I like to play with it first, grab the data, and then I'll go to Automate at the end. Some people might start with Automate, but that's kind of my approach. I also have to get things QA'd, or people need to verify or look at something. So I find it's really good to give somebody an Excel file that will open up the API with their level of access. And it's a simple tool. Everybody has Excel, and you can say, oh, call that up in Excel and take a look at it. So I'm going to show you that today. All right. And some of the links I'm doing. I also used I'm going to be demoing Atlassian here. So if you're not familiar with Atlassian, it's like a Jira. It's a ticketing system to track tickets. I set up a free demo site just to do some of the work. So let me get out of that. And so here's Atlassian. So this is one of the things I got where I needed to add a lot of department names for security. So the one thing I liked about Atlassian is I can actually set security on the issue types. It's kind of like, Jira, on a SharePoint on a custom list. You can't really have security, but in Atlassian you can. So whenever we have to have a lot of list items in Jira, their issues, we'll do security. And so we can have many, many different departments be in one project site, but only see their issues. You can do something like that in SharePoint on a custom list, because you can, edit everything at the item level, but it's easier. So let me show you the API. So this is PowerShell, and in PowerShell, it took me a while to kind of Google how to do this in PowerShell, but basically you log in. Every API has its own documentation, how to log in and hit it. In the Atlassian world, if I just do my headers here, basically they just want an authentication header and then basic, and then this is actually your email address, and your password. This is how this looks up here. So if I do a value here, I'm going to change this API key when I'm done, but this is my login name, and my key. So that's how that works. So let me just run this and show you here real quick. So I'm going to come down here. Now in PowerShell, the invoke web request, it took me a while to kind of find this command. So this is the command that actually gets the data. So I'm going to run this command here. And it got me 11 items. So I'm just going to highlight groups here and run the groups and show you. So it got me these 11 groups here. And this is over here on the page. So this is, department AAF. So I'm just pulling this data that I would get from the UI using PowerShell. If I go to now, most of these PowerShell URLs, if I just do the URL here, here's the URL I'm hitting, right? So I'm hitting this URL. You can take the URL and put it right into a browser. And so I put the same URL into a browser, and I'm already logged in. So this only works if you've already opened the site and you're authenticated to the site. Then you can see the API. So a lot of people might try to use an API, but the API is not authenticated to the browser. Once you're authenticated, you can see the data. Now, I like to use this Chrome plugin. It's called SharePoint REST JSON. I use this for many other sites. As you can see, I'm not on a SharePoint site. If I was on a SharePoint site, you can just the same method you can use for SharePoint. I all the time go into SharePoint. I pull down groups, or I'll pull down users. So, hub sites, I'll go if there's an API for it, pull down information. So, the main thing is when you're using these plugins, you want to. So this is the plugin I'm using, SP REST JSON. I use it for many different sites. The main thing is when you configure the plugin, you want to tell it what URLs you use. So I added /rest here, but you can see I have all the SharePoint APIs here, API web sites. So when I hit all these APIs in SharePoint, I'm getting I'm getting the data. So the first thing I do is I look at the data in a browser. The next thing I do is I come over here to PowerShell, and I format my PowerShell to kind of get the data. And then I have to fix the data. So first thing I do is I get the body. So here's the body. When I got the data, this body, and I know all the information is here. Sorry, it's here in content. So then what I do is I say, now in content here, you can see this is actually JSON code in here. You can kind of looks like JSON. You have the opening brackets and comma, and it's nested. So what I'm doing is I'm taking, so this is my first request. I did an invoke web request, and all the data is stored in body. And then I'm taking content, I'm taking body, and I'm converting it from JSON over to PowerShell, object-oriented PowerShell. So now it's an object in PowerShell. So now when I look at content here, so there's content, but when I take content and I bring it up to groups, so this is, I'm going to see all my groups. So there's all my groups. So that's kind of how I do it. Atlassian only gives you 50 returns at a time. On SharePoint, it gives you, the list is 1,000, 2,000 items in SharePoint. It gives you the whole thing. But most API applications will give them to you in blocks, and you have to request the next block. So either you're going to have to do a while command. And so this is a variable that Atlassian is actually nice enough to tell me when I have another page. So if Atlassian, this is the other reason why I set content up here. So when there's another page, Atlassian actually sets a value that says you have another page. And then I know to go and do a while command. So I only have 11 items. So I'm not over the 50 item mark. If I had more than 50 items, if I had 51 items, then it would go through this while command and it would loop. Okay. So let's see here. Okay. So the next step here is I'm just going to run this. So what I'm doing here is somebody gave me an Excel file with all these department names in it. I actually made another one for this demonstration. I just did a bunch of generic names to show you. And I'll run this command. Let me run this whole shell. I put a pause down here. I always put pauses in here to test things to see how they work. So what I did was I have the script looks up the Excel file, and it grabs the Excel file, and then it if the department is already there, it just shows me. But if the departments are not already there, it adds a plus to show me it added it. So these, I'm going to just stop this script. Now I can go back over here. If I go back over here, I added some more groups. The 3 with the plus just got added by running the script. Okay. All right, so we have this script. What I'm actually doing is I'm opening up an Excel file. If somebody's actually interested in this, I do a lot of PowerShell scripting in the state. I use it for administering Office 365, or some of the SharePoint sites. I use it for administering Atlassian. I'm more of a DevOps, so I try to do everything through code. One of the interesting things about this script is I'm actually calling up the Excel file here, and then I'm parsing through it. And then what I'm saying is I import the Excel file. And then what I do is I look to see when I grab this whole list of groups, to add. I'm trying to decide, is the group already there or should I add the group? And so what I do is I look at the Excel file to see if the person's already in the API data I got back from the site. And then I make that determination, if the group name does not equal the group, if the group name's not already in the site, so equal. And then I'm saying, okay, then this is the command to add the group. So I'll add the group, and then I'll do I like to do this a lot. I do a right host, I do a plus, and then the group name. And if I did not add the group, I'll just do the group name without the plus. That way you can see these were not added, and these were added. So I just want to give people some examples. So let's go into now Excel. I'm going to show you how to get this data in Excel. So I'm going to take my search URL here to show you. So this is the URL I'm using to get the data. And I showed you over here, you can see the same URL up here in the browser. I'm getting it through the browser. But I'm going to go to Excel now and get that data and show you some of the nuances in Excel. So here's just in a blank Excel document. And in any Excel, there's a data tab, and you want to get data. And a lot of people will go and you go get data from web, and it'll ask you to authenticate. But I always like to make sure that I've cleaned out any previous settings. So I always go down here to data source settings. And this shows you all the different sites you logged into. So I see Atlassian right here. So I'm actually going to get rid of this. I'm going to clear it. So that way you get the same experience as the first time I'm doing this. So I'm going to clear that. And now I'm going to go and get data. So I'm going to go get data. So I use this a lot. I use this get data from web an awful lot. I'll even call up a Excel file in Access. I'm sorry, I'll call up an Excel file from SharePoint. So I'll go into SharePoint, I'll find an Excel file, and I'll get the path for it. And then I'll go get from web, and I'll put the Excel file path in here. But right now I'm doing API, so I'm going to paste in the API. So that's the URL. I'm going to click OK. Now you get this box. Because I cleared that setting, I'm seeing this login window. If I didn't, this remembers it once, you won't get this box again. So a lot of people get confused. They don't know how to go back to this login window. So I'm going to do a basic authentication. And so I'm going to take my login, which is, it's actually Bill. I'm going to take my password. And in most products, you set an API key. So I have a password to log in, but I went to my profile on the application and I click create a key, and it creates an API key. So I use the API key. You don't typically use your own password. You're usually using a key that you created. So when I click connect, and this is what happens in Excel. Okay, I'm going to perform the same exact steps in Power BI. So let me call up Power BI here. And I'm going to Power BI. They both use Power Query in the back end, but I'm going to show you how it's a little bit different in Power BI. So I'm going to go get data, and in Power BI, I'm going to do it from the web. Very similar to what I did in Excel. And I'm going to paste in, I'm going to paste in my URL. Let's just get it from here. Okay, and then this is the same query screen. Now you see over here, I actually see the data. When I did it in Excel, I get this. I'm like, what? You can't navigate. So Power BI is a little bit more intelligent, where it'll go and grab your data, just like here. So these both look alike. But Power BI is a little bit more intelligent, where it'll convert it to a table. It'll expand the table. It'll expand the values. You know, it'll do the work for you. Actually, what it's doing is it's clicking up here and it's saying expand. So it'll do the steps for you, which is really nice, right? So Excel is still a little bit behind, even though Excel is using the same, when you do get data using the same tool, the Power Query tool. I think Chrissy knows better than me the name of it. But so what I'll do is I'll use Power BI here, and then Power BI, click Advanced Editing. And now that I have everything working, I'll just copy that. So I'm just using Power BI to copy that. And then over here, and then on data, there's also an Advanced Editing. I'll just take it and paste it in. And now I have my data in Excel. So I like Excel. You know, I use the get data a lot, but I find it doesn't work as fluently as Power BI. So I'll use Power BI go back to Excel, and now I have an Excel file to give to somebody. I can now save the Excel file, hand it off, and then I just tell people when you go into it, click on, refresh. Let me close this down. I'll show you. So this is the Power Query editor. So same editor that's in Power BI. Power BI just a little bit better at helping you navigate and walk through the data, where Excel, it doesn't quite do that well. So when I close this down, and when I close it, my data is going to come over here to Excel. So here's my data, the same data, the same groups I was showing you earlier. And then what you do is you go back to data. Whenever you want to refresh the data, you click refresh here. It doesn't refresh the data automatically. You have to actually click refresh. And like I said, whenever you have a problem with Excel, always go to your data settings, and you may have to click, you can come in here, and this is where you get edit permissions. This is where, if I want to change that permission, this is the only way to get back to it. So it's very confusing because you get this once, you're like, how do I get that box again? I made a mistake, or I want to do something else. So it's really hidden. Back here on data settings, and then you go down to data options. It's also hidden on Power BI too. And so when you're using Power BI, and here's Power BI. So I have my data in here in Power BI. You have to actually put down a column and then check everything off. And then in Power BI, that first time you log in, it works, but it's hidden over here. So in Power BI, it's over here on options. And so on options, you have data source settings. And this is where I can clear the thing. So I just want to kind of go over the nuances, the two different tools. I think a lot of people have a hard time getting started with APIs, working with them. Like for example, the Graph Explorer is really good on Office 365. I like to work with the URL first, then work through everything. Anybody have any questions? I covered a lot of information quickly. I was trying to make it more of a demo.
I got a question for you, Bill.
Yeah.
When you use that API key in place of the username and password, is that still tied? Is that API key tied to your account, or does that enable it so that it can be like shared with other developers working on the same project, like a service account?
Yep, it's tied to my account. So every application is different, but in Atlassian, I go to your profile, and then here there's a security, but manage your API tokens. So here, once I create an API, most applications like this, I can label anything I want, but I created an API, and once I did that, you can see the API, then it goes away. You only can see it once. So usually you got to create these APIs. You have to copy the code. So it's a password in lieu of your password.
Okay.
Every application is different. So this is
but it's
where
still tied to your account, and most likely, if your account was disabled, your API token would be disabled as well.
Yes, unless you're dealing with. So in Atlassian, there's an API tied to my user, but there's also an API tied. There's like a global admin API, and that one is just the password. It doesn't get tied to my user. So any org admin can go in. So every application is different. So you have to know the application. Is this API tied to a user, or is this an API across the whole application? But that's a great question. As I work with more and more applications, I'm seeing more and more nuances. Yeah. And then I have to change my code a lot depending on the applications. Like here, this one wants my email address, and the password.
So based on that, do you have any recommendations for best practices from a security standpoint as to how you would build an automation?
Build an automation, because because some of those from automation stuff, you have to put your password in there. I don't like that. Where Secure Store in the olden days, your password would be encrypted. On Power BI, I have to create a custom data connector so that my password's in data connector. So on a Power BI gateway, once I get Power BI working, I get it tested. I'm doing this from a developer point of view. Like right in Power BI, I might have, sometimes like that global key I talked about earlier can't be saved in Power BI. So I had to do it right in the advanced query. And let me see if I can call that report up. I can show that report. And so in the advanced query, so I'll do a parameter like that to get it tested from a developer's point of view. So from developer's point of view, I have to, put, actually, yeah. So here's more an advanced query I did. So this query is going through an API. And what I did was I saved the key as a variable in Power BI for now. This one actually is using the next page query. So this one goes through and it looks for data next, and then it iterates over a list. I'm looping through, like I'm doing several gets of data here. This actually does a loop. If there's a next URL, so I look for the next URL and I loop. But I had to save, this one just does a global API key, so I had to save it locally as a variable. Then on Power BI Gateway, I make a custom data connector and I bring that password and the token back to the data connector. And then that way somebody just hits the data connector and that's how they get the data. So you do have to really worry about security when it comes to APIs. Each one is unique and complex. There's no easy answer.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's kind of my presentation. Anybody else have any other questions?
It was awesome, though.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill. That was great. All right, I'm going to share my screen for the closeout slides in the raffle. All right, so we do have an open call for speakers. So if you have anything that you'd like to share with the group, we'd love to hear from you. Please come submit the form that's on your screen here, and we'll be happy to reach out to you and talk about your potential session. So that being said, we do have some upcoming community events. So we have a variety of ongoing meetings that occur every month. If you go to pmp.github.io, you'll get a list of these plus additional ones to be part of the broader communities. We have a few conferences coming up. We have the Scottish Summit, which is going to be in a few weeks from now. You can check them out on scottishsummit.com. Microsoft Inspire, so for all of the Microsoft partners on the call here, it's going to be in July and virtual this year. And that URL is incorrect, but if you Google Inspire, you'll get to it. We have Collab Days New England, which is the SharePoint Saturday evolution, which will be here on Saturday, October 22nd. I don't believe they've opened registrations yet, but keep an eye out for that, or at least save the date on your calendar. And there's also the European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure conference happening in late November in Denmark. So be sure to check that out if you're looking to travel. So I'm going to give a quick shout out to our neighboring user groups. We have the Rhode Island one run by DRC Hess, the Hartford one run by Jared, the Granite State one run by Julie and Jim, and a couple of other ones in the Boston area as well. Focus more on Azure and Power BI. So that being said, we'll like to open the floor. Does anyone have any problems or any tips? Are you banging your head against the wall with a problem that you've run into, or potentially found a solution to something that others might benefit from? But does anyone have anything to add to this?
Go ahead, speak.
Hey, Christy, go ahead.
You, not me.
It's Yap. So question is, I really want to be able to share my my day on the to-do. Is there any way that's going to be possible? I've been looking into setting up some kind of Power App or something. I can't find anything.
That's an excellent question. I'm not that familiar with to do in context of integrations, but is there anyone else on this call that might have faced this scenario before?
I mean, I have a small team of three people working for me, and we want to be able to just be able to share my day with our team.
Yeah. Well, we have silence on the call here, so I'm not sure if anyone's run into that, but I think that is an interesting problem to try to solve.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for sharing the challenge there. Deb, I think you're up next.
Yeah, so I've got a scenario where I'm working with it's a regulatory submission process we're working on. And we've got individual documents that get put into a folder, and then some of the documents need to be moved together to another site where they're going to be worked on another library and another site. You know, back in the day, I would have done this with document sets. We would have done a SharePoint Designer workflow. I am struggling looking through Power Automate. Hold on a second, my puppy's rummaging through my router there. Never mind. We're struggling with, how to take these documents when they're all set up to equal to the same status to get them to move over together. Like any suggestions
sure.
on how? Like I said, document sets is in the past what I would have done, but document sets just don't seem to do much anymore.
Document sets are still a viable option for that. I just rolled out a solution for a client of mine that's doing candidate tracking, and they're gathering documents, and if they hire the candidate, the document set is moved over to their HR department.
Yeah, and that's actually another scenario I'm thinking about doing as well there. Yeah.
The other option is that if the files all need different metadata to be assigned to them, you can build, let's say, a flow that just runs on a daily basis or hourly basis, however often you'd like it to run. And it just scans all of the files in a given library. And if, let's say, all the files in a given folder all have the same value of a status, then take an action on it, so just move it to a different location.
Yeah.
But if you don't need different metadata for each file, then yes, document sets are going to be the better approach.
So Nicole, you're right. There are major metadata issues if you're moving files from one site to not if you're using the content type hub. So what we're doing is we're making sure we're using the content type hub to create our site columns. So we're making sure we've got all of our columns named the same thing. So that should not be an issue for us with what we're doing here.
Yes, but there is an issue with there is a hidden metadata list.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the IDs don't map up, now maybe the content type hub solves for that, but
it does.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why you do it. Yeah, that's why you do it. This is my first time using the content type hub in modern SharePoint because we just were not, as an organization, mature enough. And now we're starting to mature. We're hitting that SharePoint maturity model. Woohoo.
Yeah, we've been able to develop workflows that move content from one site to another based on metadata.
Yeah.
That's something you can't do with Flow.
Nicole, I was going to say, if you're not using the content type hub, you can still recreate the same content types in another site using PowerShell. So you'd use one PowerShell to extract the content type definitions from one site, including the IDs and everything else, and then you could recreate the same exact IDs on another site.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they told
and actually, if you want to skip a bunch of steps there, you can use that technique that Dimitri just described to move your content types that were not created on the hub to the hub.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the hub will take care of it from there.
Yeah.
So
I would love if you could share any information about that, because this is wreaking havoc on our products.
This could be a whole session on the new modern content type hub, and then site columns. Trying to figure out the site columns in the content type hub is really crazy. I've actually just saved my link. I apologize for the background noise. I have a puppy.
Oh, great. Now my puppies are looking for your puppy.
I've got this crazy toy that when you move it around, you can hear the noise in the background. It vibrates and it keeps them entertained. Anyways, so finding the content type hub is a challenge in your admin gallery. But then finding the site columns themselves is challenging. I'm going to mute. Sorry.
Well, we used the classic content type hub before they got rid of it. So everything is in there, but
well, if you want to work with the site columns, it really is classic, which is crazy. And then, the grouping went away with content type hub. That's annoying. Even though you still choose a group, you just don't see it anymore.
You can actually recreate that just by customizing the view. It's actually the first thing that I do to the modern
I tried
thing.
doing that. I didn't.
You can-
all right, maybe I gotta look again. But
You can customize the view, and I now have a view called classic CTH view.
I hate when they take something that's good and make it less good. Pisses me off.
I mean, I don't know if I would call the original content type hub good. It worked once in a blue moon.
It works all the time. You just got to know what you're doing.
All the time.
It's awesome.
To be honest, I haven't had a chance to play with the modern one yet. But
So
I've
you're
had
complaining
limited-
over nothing.
no, I'm complaining about the original one, the one from the on-prem days,
Yeah.
and that had all sorts of issues.
So if I move everything in there, it will use those ID numbers instead of the site-specific ones?
Correct. Well, yes. As long as just prior to the move, you need to make sure that there are no columns with the same name in the content type hub. But what you could do is create a project around basically taking all of your site columns and centralizing them into the hub. And then once you get that all normalized, which is the new data term that I've learned from my dear friend Chrissy on this call. So once you've normalized all of that, then you can distribute it out from there.
Awesome. I will definitely look into. Thank you.
Not a problem.
Nicole, do you have ShareGate by any chance?
We do.
Oh,
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think ShareGate will allow you to migrate that visually for the
No.
content types.
Oh, into the content type hub? Okay. Because that's how we got into this mess, because we migrated content from one site to a new site, and
Mhm.
the ID numbers don't map. If you,
mhm.
it's a long story. But
And I've done that
XML has
before.
old
When I
ID
copied
numbers.
content from one site to another, I've had the same issue too, even though you named it the same way. But by using the content type hub, yeah, it goes away.
Okay, great.
And by the way, some praxis. Mark Anderson did a nice little video on the modern content type hub about a week or so ago.
Oh, cool. I'll look into that.
Yep.
Yeah, good questions all around. Is anyone else facing anything abnormal or strange with Office 365?
I find that the new associated hub links to be very bizarre.
I just want to keep saying this: the sub hubs.
The sub hub. I like that. That's good.
I called it that 3 years ago. I kept saying I want a sub hub, and now they finally gave them to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do with them now.
All right, so we are meeting next month on the 16th. We're actually talking to a few potential speakers. So we will keep everyone posted via the newsletter and Eventbrite and Meetup and LinkedIn and Twitter as soon as we have that finalized. So thanks again to Turn Digital for being our platinum sponsor. And of course, we'd like to shout out all of our previous sponsors, which helped support the group and keep it going strong over these last 8 years. So that being said, we do have a couple of raffles, and actually we have one more slide after this to talk about anyone hiring or looking for work.